Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Arnis Luks here at the Freedom Forum, and I'd like to welcome Robert Klinck from Canada. Welcome, Robert.
Good to be here, Arnie.
And Wallace Klinck, also from Canada. Welcome, Wallace.
Hi, Arnie. Good to see you back from your long jaunt across your continent.
I only covered the eastern seaboards, and I didn't. I mean, from where I was, I ended up at Harvey Bay, which is about 400 k's north of Brisbane. But you've got to put it in perspective. I think I saw a sign there, Cairns, 1600 and something kilometres, another 1,000 mile to go before you got to Cairns, and that's not even the tip. So it's you can keep going for weeks at a time if you're driving,
Yeah.
whatever.
You
It's
see,
still
I've always thought of Australia as just being a little island down there.
yeah, a little
Not
bit more,
quite.
a little bit more than an island. I mean, I'm a pretty good driver. I can do the 1,000 k's a day straight up. But when you consider that Perth is 3 days drive,
Yeah,
Darwin
well,
3 days drive, Cairns possibly 4 or even 5 days drive from Adelaide, it's these are these are huge distances, and
I think I think that your country, Australia, is equivalent in land mass to the continental United States, isn't it?
I think it's a bit shy of it,
Not much.
but it's still a good size.
Yeah.
Australia is a good size continent, and there's a lot of nothing in between. Central New South Wales, as I was driving through that, of course, there was drought. The animals were really suffering, and of course, barren land. They really so need rain. And when I was in Inverell, it got to minus 3.6 overnight. So there was ice everywhere. So not only is it
Wow.
parched and no food, but it's also freezing. So it's really quite hostile.
Yeah.
And you head a little bit further west, and of course, then you're into the deserts. The deserts, and there it's this time of year it'll still get up to your high 20s or early 30s, but of
Hmm.
course come spring it'll move into the 40s. So it's such a variety of climates from the tropics, north of Brisbane, the tropics, to freezing barren lands, to the lush forests of Victoria. I mean, it was.
When we were in Melbourne, I'm sure we had at least three different climates in one day, or four, actually four.
They often say that. They often say that for Victoria, especially for Melbourne. Yeah, all the seasons in one day. That's right.
Couldn't believe it.
Yeah, yeah, no worries. All right, our subject for today is forced savings and superannuation, and it's essentially in regard to confiscation of your income after you've earned it, after you've paid all your taxes, um, compulsory superannuation and forced savings. So the floor is yours, Robert.
Well, I'd make the point that social credit has a very different perspective on uh, how people should be benefiting from the economy. And the governments at the present time are constantly encouraging people to save. Now, the implication of this is that you are facing some kind of insecurity in the future. Now, social credit, because it would bestow on people the benefits of their cultural heritage, which means that they would participate fully in the productive capacity of the economy, doesn't accept this this notion. And Christ said, behold the lilies of the field, they toil not. And the lilies of the field don't save. And in nature, you see very few instances of creatures saving. We've got squirrels in Canada, and they put nuts away for the winter, but when winter comes, they usually can't find where they hid them. So it's not a very efficient way of saving. But animals just live day to day, and they live off their environment.
Hmm.
And they do quite well. And humans should be able to do the same thing if they had access to the the productive capacity of their economy.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea that we should be laying up savings because the future is so insecure is really harmful to our psychology, and it tends to distract us from the potential we have around us now, which is enormous.
I
There's
agree.
no reason, no necessity for people to be saving when they are living currently off the production of our economy, which is generating oceans of production all the time and has all the means of distributing it.
That's right. I agree, Robert. I'm led to the words of Christ when he says, "I have come that ye might have life more abundant." I have come that ye should have life more abundant. And if there is ever a time in our history when life is more abundant, it is now. And I really I can't help but bring this up. And this is this folly of this professor from Canada, Jordan Peterson, when he's saying that life is suffering. And this to me is not Christian at all. Life is not suffering. Life is abundant. I have come that ye have life more abundant. And it's not the dominance hierarchy, it's mutual love and cooperation. And so to me, this is a false message, a false prophet, if you like. And so it's leading people astray. He is leading people astray. Wally Klinck.
I agree with you, Arnie. I mean, actually, I think he doesn't conceive of the cultural heritage in the way that we do. To him, it is, if it means anything, it is something that is just a heritage in terms of knowledge and so on, that doesn't really have any practical or tangible existence. It's just an idea.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that he misses the boat on that. And I don't think it's normal. It should be normal for someone to say that life is a series of tragedies. What an outlook.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what does this mean?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think before you make a statement like that, you'd better do a pretty exhaustive investigation into what your real potentialities are.
That's right. I agree.
And
Forced savings and superannuation, Wally. Sorry for the distraction.
well, the thing of it is, as Bob was saying, they're always telling us to save.
Mm-hmm.
But there is no necessary correlation between monetary saving and saving of real things, of capital, of tools and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And when you need to use tools, you monetize them in such a way that they can be activated. You certainly don't want an equivalent amount of money in the economy to the entire capital value of the nation. That would be rather a heavy upward pressure on the price of consumer goods. It just doesn't reflect reality. So, yeah, Douglas said that all new production must be financed by new credits. And in fact, that is a very common way of doing it today.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is, in doing that, the credits go forward to initiate production. And of course, naturally, everything that is involved in production is the cost of the final product. And the way it's done now, because of certain, well, there's a very interesting document here. It's called the A plus B theorem.
Mm-hmm.
And it is by a professional accountant. And he has a master's. And he's written a very good, relatively brief rundown of Douglas's analysis of the price system. That is, that costs and prices are generated in excess of the incomes available to liquidate them when the product is bought. And he indicates that there are three major considerations here, and that's savings by the public. If the public saves, the public withdraws effective purchasing power.
That's right.
Immobilizes it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not available, and yet the goods are there to be bought.
Mhm.
So that immobilizes goods, which doesn't make sense. You produce them to use them, not to have them immobilized.
Mhm.
And that is just simple. And when he says savings by the public, of course, he means net savings. Some savings are spent, some savings are saved. And so you've got your net savings that he's
Mhm.
talking about here.
Mhm.
And then he's talking about bank and company reserves. Businesses build up reserves. And that also means that money is short-circuited before it reaches the consumer and is not available to the consumer when these goods come out.
Mhm.
So there's another problem for you. And he's as Douglas said, we are forced, the consumer is forced through prices and through this building up of reserves and so on. The companies do, and pretty well have to do, so that we as consumers are, in a sense, we are forced to invest in the economy. We don't think of it that way. We don't realize it because we don't see that happening.
Mhm.
All we know is we're paying for goods and services, but we don't really break down in our minds what it's all about.
Mm.
So this causes a deficiency of effective available purchasing power.
Yeah.
And you see the problem with these savings. If they're saved into a business like that, the only way they can become purchasing power is to be released through production. And if you release them through production, you have to create a whole new set of goods and a whole new set of costs and prices. So it actually creates a very serious deficiency of effective purchasing power.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
And
it's
so that's the way things are accounted these days, and it's not a realistic way of doing it. And also accumulation of capital. And in this case, he's talking about money capital, money that goes into capital reserve again. So it's really we're getting to this business of savings. You know, the Bible, of course, as you were saying, Bob, has some things to say about that. One of them is don't store up treasures on earth where things mold and corrupt and rust and so on. They're no good to you after they have spoiled,
Mhm.
or even if they have simply become obsolete to the point they're not too useful anymore. In other words, there's only one moment of time for human beings, and that is the everlasting, ever-present now. We only live now. Why should we forgo living now for a completely indefinite and unpredictable future?
I've just started to think on what you do by if you're at university. You're actually going under a period of discipline in order for hopefully a better future for yourself and for your
Mhm.
family. So,
Mhm.
so in a sense, you are building up storage in the hope of securing a better income, a better lifestyle for you and your family, and I appreciate where we're coming from, where people's thoughts might be coming from, but the area we're actually discussing in particular is in regard to the confiscation of your savings for either superannuation or for retirement, call it whatever you like, but essentially put it off for a future. Now, I know Australia's history, Federation, 1901, the platform for the first government was old age pensions. The first
Mhm.
government in Australia, all right, 120 years ago,
Oh,
old age
really?
pensions. And yet, here we are in the late 90s under Keating, was a compulsory superannuation. It was the same thing 100 years later, compulsory superannuation. And the fact is, it's confiscation. It's confiscation of your spending power. And really, if you like it, I would describe it as sabotage of the economy because they're continuing to strip your spending power again and again and again. First with the old age pensions with income tax, federal level income tax, and now with compulsory superannuation 100 years later, you don't get anywhere near the potential spending power that you should. And yet our debt levels are going through the roof. An erosion of our spending power and our debt levels are going through the roof. It's a, if you like, it's a false narrative. It's a completely false narrative of the abundance that is out there, especially with industrialization, automation, advanced controlled robotics. Robert Klinck.
The government and the powers that be, one might say, are, I think, always concerned that the public should not have a realistic grasp of the potential wealth that they could have access to. And this forced saving has the effect of reducing consumer demand and therefore slowing down the economy. And so people are always living in an economy that I would say is in a constant state of recession. You know, the economists say, are we going into a recession or something worse? I would say that we're always in a recession because we have an insufficient consumer purchasing power in the hands of the public. So the forced savings and the withdrawal of purchasing power from the economy by this means has this effect of reinforcing the impression people have that the economy is not as bountiful as it actually is. And this is a psychological condition in which it is essential that the establishment keep the public mind, because once people grasp the reality of what we're actually capable of with all the modern techniques of production, they will never go back. Once they see this, you can't bring them back to a condition where they believe in austerity and poverty and that sort of thing. So this is a means whereby they reinforce that perception that they are constantly trying to have the impose upon the public.
Scarcity, I think, might be the word. Scarcity.
Scarcity.
Insecurity.
Absolutely.
Fear.
That's
I think
right.
is part of it.
Yeah.
Now, in the travels that I've just recently done, I saw an area, Western New South Wales, which was dry and parched. But I also saw Eyre Peninsula, which is the size of Tasmania, one of the states in Australia, Eyre Peninsula, and I saw it as lush and green and bountiful. The rains had come. They hadn't been there for 2 years, but they had come, and the crops were growing. And Eyre Peninsula to me was an island of green and thousands of square kilometres and absolutely beautiful. And then as I travelled, say, eastern Victoria or through Victoria, you've got lush growth, rains, even storms with so much rain everywhere. So to me, it's a time of bounty. It's a time of plentifulness, not just with the rain, although the rain is necessary, but sunshine when you needed it to the north, and the winds and the water. Are dams filling up? They are. But also what I did see was I saw a couple of irrigation schemes, and this was fascinating. Griffith, Murrumbidgee Irrigation Authority. It's got a couple of other names, but essentially it's the citrus capital of New South Wales. Prolific amount of growth there, where they've dammed up a couple of rivers, and so they've drought-proofed agriculture. They've drought-proofed it. Now I think that that's a very important consideration. They've drought-proofed it. In other words, oh, we'll have drought, we'll have pestilence. No, you dam up the rivers and then you control the water flow so that it continues through irrigation canals and that to produce food in the dry or not in the dry, anytime. Now we've got the same to the north, Kununurra, Argyle, all that way. It's in Western Australia, and it's the northeastern parts of Western Australia. But there There is so much water there, so much water. There was an area there called Wyndham. I think there were seven rivers going to the ocean at the same time through this plateau. Seven rivers coming together, and the water is abundant. The water is abundant. They could, who was it? One of our politicians was talking about a Bradfield scheme of damming up and redirecting the water inland. There are so many options. It's not just one to actually harness the water and drought proof the nation so that we can grow in season and out of season. It is a time of plenty. Remember the fig tree story where Christ cursed it because it didn't have figs on it out of season, but it could have. That's the point. It could have. It could have produced good fruit in season or out of season. And that to me is this life more abundant? It's a promise. We just have to look at God's creation, and there it is. Scarcity is a thing of the past. Wallace Klinck.
It certainly is, Arnie. Potentially, certainly. Sometimes we get a bit of a scarcity, but that's more likely to be because maybe the economy has been thrown into a tailspin by an artificial contraction of credit. And it could be that producers are having so much trouble selling their product that they maybe reduce their orders from their suppliers. But this is just an induced thing. It's not nothing to do with reality if demand were actually equated with production. Financial demand. But you see, there has been this idea that if you want to get ahead by developing more productive capacity tools and so on of various kinds, that you have to save. In other words, you have to constrict your consumption in order to produce more capital. And that is a completely unsound conception. It's not true, but it is literally forced on us with the savings that is, as you say, with superannuation and with all these three things that I mentioned here, by the savings by the public and building up of reserves and accumulation of capital. So you see, it's a false concept, and what it does is it constricts our lives. It means that we're not enjoying lives, the results of our production, anywhere near to the extent we should be able to. And when I say that, I'm not just talking about the consumption of consumer goods. I'm talking about the amount of leisure that you could have if you didn't have to be kept on a treadmill all the time. So, and you have to remember that it's not just a profusion of goods we're talking about. We're talking about a standard of life. A life where there's sufficient leisure that you can actually enjoy some of the things that you have produced, and that you can have time to think, to cogitate, to think about the nature of the universe, the nature of life, and maybe once in a while get an inspiration for something even more efficient. Which right. Exactly is what. And if you have a lot of independence, you're more likely to do that. Because if you're a slave, you don't have too much time for creative thinking.
No, exactly right, Wally. When I was in oil and gas, we were on a 35-hour week. I think some of the bureaucracies were going to a 32-hour week at one stage. Now, my children can't even dream of a life like that because they're working 60 hours a week and they're under contract and they're on quarter the income, relative speaking, or even less of what I was in the oil and gas industry. And so it's double the hours and quarter the pay. So theirs is one of scarcity from the start, and of course the existing financial narrative is such that all new credits can only come into existence in the form of a debt.
That's right.
So there is no inheritance of the culture, the cultural productive capacity, the raw materials, the sunlight, the rain. There is no inheritance for my children. But for the wealthy, there is inheritance. They certainly protect themselves with inheritance. But the cultural inheritance, which belongs to everyone, they're stopped. They're thwarted from receiving theirs, and that is so wrong. Yeah.
It's obscene. It's obscene that these young people should be faced with that uncertainty. And that fear, actually, of the future. At one time, we didn't have as much in terms of real wealth. But believe me, we didn't have the insecurity because we needed so much to survive, and we had more nearly enough money to buy what was available on the
Mm.
shelves to be bought.
Mm-hmm.
But today, people have to go massively into debt in order
Yeah.
to, acquire what they do, and it means you're borrowing on the future.
Mm.
Well, if you think about it realistically, you can't eat next year's crop.
No.
I defy anyone to try it.
Yeah.
He will end up in an insane asylum, or he should. I mean, it's insane. You
Yeah.
cannot eat next year's crop. So why then are you looking at life in that way?
Mm.
Why do we not look at life as enjoying what we have? Yes, saving enough seed and enough essential tools
Mm-hmm.
to provide for our needs in the future.
Mm.
But you see, it gets to the point where we have to, in order to generate enough income to buy what we're producing, we have to create a whole lot of new things, a whole mountain of capital goods,
Mm.
not necessarily because they're needed or even that they're desirable in the case of military hardware and so on, just to generate incomes, not to buy the things we're producing,
Mm.
but to buy the things we produced in the past.
Mm.
The system is out of synchronization.
Mm-hmm.
It's not synchronized.
Mm.
And we're falling further and further behind all the time, having a bigger and bigger gap between effective, incomes and the prices of goods on the shelf, constantly getting a bigger and bigger spread.
Mm.
And we can either shut the whole thing down, or we can, decide to live. But if we do decide to live, how are we going to do it? There's only one way permitted, and that's to go to the banks and obtain from them credit or money in the form of a repayable debt.
Yeah.
It's not to fill a gap, and in the sense of allowing these costs to be permanently liquidated.
Mm.
Sure, when the new money is passed on to the producer, he then can liquidate his costs at that point. But now you have got debts against the future which weigh against the entire productive system. So you're not liquidating the costs, you're just shunting them to the future as a burden upon the future.
That's right. To the point where the whole world debt, it can produce constantly flat out for 3 years and still not redeem the existing debt. And that's how absurd it is. Robert Klinck.
Yeah, well, the young people, I guess these changes occur, I mean, the degradation occurs slowly enough that young people don't see a contrast with what has been before. So they are just unaware of the conditions that existed in, say, in the 1950s, or what university used to be like. When I went to university, the fees for a semester were something like $300, I think. And now they're immense, they're 10,000 or more dollars. And the young people are convinced or are persuaded that this is a normal situation. And therefore they are tricked into getting into debt, and they become slaves of the financial system for a good part of their younger years. So it's a terrible thing that is being done to the youth today, and that you lose track of reality.
Mm-hmm.
Not only that, when they're insisting that people should be responsible for saving for their retirement.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's also a phenomenon of inflation.
Mm-hmm.
So when you end up drawing on your savings at the end of this lengthy process of setting money aside, you don't know what the savings are actually going to be worth. So that is another form of entrapment of the population, and it is that's a dishonest way of dealing with people,
Mm-hmm.
to lead them into this this pattern of saving when you don't know what the end result is going to be,
Yeah.
when you actually have to draw on the savings.
Yeah. That means
And of course, inflation is basically in our system cost push inflation because of this phenomenon of constantly accumulating costs. So the social credit proposal to have a reduced cost structure would eliminate this problem of the reduction of savings, the sapping of savings through inflation over the years.
No worries. Thank you for that, Robert. We're at the 30-minute mark. I'm going to just call for closing comments, please. Wallace, Klinck.
Well, absolutely, Bob. It is really tragic. It's really, when you think about it, quite sad because these young people do not understand what's going on. One of the main problems is that we are not credited for our enormous capital development. We have to pay for it when we produce it. And it's inflationary. But the thing of it is, we have to pay for it again as that money is recovered through prices. So we're double charged for our capital. And here we are in a situation where we have enormous productive capacity. And every time we make it better and more productive through efficiency, we actually make the situation worse because we increase non-labor costs relative to labor costs, and we as consumers have to pay for both. And so it's rather demoralizing when you think that every time that you physically do something to improve your situation, the financial system comes right around and sabotages it through rising prices.
Yeah.
Isn't it? I mean, it's incomprehensible in a way. The problem is that money is an abstract thing. In nature, things just happen. Money, energy works upon materials and things flow. But we have to somehow give a numerical, abstract representation of what we're doing in order to conduct a rational economy. But we don't seem to have a clear understanding of what the processes that are going on really mean. That they really mean a reduction of physical cost, which, according to any logic at all, literally has to mean that you have to have a falling price level. But we don't. We have an increasingly inflationary situation. Actually, Douglas said that the prize is the cultural heritage. The cultural heritage has been stolen from us by the financial system.
That's exactly right. Thank you for that, Wally. Closing comments, please, Robert.
Well, as I said before, the system we're in is one that has been designed for the purpose of maintaining the control of the financial monopoly over society. And they say people are responsible for defending themselves against this by themselves by denying automatic access to what is being produced by automated and robotic processes now, which could be accelerated quite easily. There's no limit to the number of robots we can manufacture, and there's no real limit to the ingenuity with which we can apply them to providing ourselves with goods and services. So we should be living off of our current potentiality, but because we have an artificial and kind of constipated financial system, we're not able to do that. We're not able to do that. So the priority is to fix the financial system so it gives the population the full benefit of the productive system.
These are interesting summaries from both you gentlemen, and the only thing I'd like to add is that if we look at the material world, you've actually got to place yourself out in context. In context. We're discussing things theoretical, but place them in context. Go to any industry, and you'll see that engineers are working vigorously to build and design labour-saving devices. And every time there's a new labour-saving device, and I watched it over my entire working career, new labour-saving devices. The latest thing I saw in the building industry was a brick machine, a robot with an arm that automatically laid bricks for a whole house. a brick machine, and it does it in hours what took bricklayers days and days. And so with that sort of development, the robot bricklayer goes from house to house to house, and they can build multiple numbers of houses, and it just goes on and on and on. But the thing is that when you've got the robot doing it, how do the bricklayers get paid? How do they get spending power? This is the phenomena that we're looking at. The financial system does not take it into account. How can people buy what the machines produce? They can't. And what we're seeing is the phenomena of the ever increasing debt. Nations, individuals, communities, corporate bodies, whole countries, and now the world. It's everything is in debt. And of course, that's a false narrative. It's a false paradigm, if you like. We've got to demesmerize ourselves. We've got to actually go outside and put it in context. In the real world, it is one of abundance. I have come that ye have life more abundant, and it's being stolen from us, and we have to wake up. This is Arnis Luks, Robert Klinck, Wally Klinck. Thank you so much for joining us today, gentlemen.
Thank you, Arnie.
Thank you.
No worries. Cheers, ladies and gentlemen.